as Arjun, I think, was sort of saying earlier, I think in some sense, this is almost giving economics as a field too much credit, in the sense that it suggests that a lot of economic outcomes are directly dependent on the advice given by economists. And I think, economics, as we've said, has an enormous prestige in terms of, the presence of economists in all sorts of public debates. But I think a lot of times, if you look at how views actually change, it's not the economists who are leading the way. It's the politicians or the broader public who shift, and then the economists kind of come in to justify this after the fact. I think, there's a certain sense, just as a concrete example, where a lot of the development in macroeconomic theory over the past generation has been a sort of after the fact effort to justify the kind of policies that central banks were already following. Like a way of demonstrating that what central banks were already doing in terms of like inflation targeting, using something like a Taylor rule and so on, was actually the socially optimal thing. And I think that generalizes pretty widely. So I'm not sure that we should be blaming or crediting economists for policy outcomes that often they probably do more to legitimate or help with the execution of them to actually shape. The other reason I don't personally see this as a particularly productive direction to go in is who's gonna impose the accountability, who's gonna step in and say, all right, you were wrong and that had consequences and now you're gonna pay a penalty. There's no consensus position from which to do that. So I think we all just have to go on making our arguments, the best we can, and we're not going to reach agreement. And so we try to shift the debate our way and somebody else shifts it their way. And there's never going to be an impartial referee who's going to come in and say that, one side was right and the other was wrong.
Yeah, I think, having done this, being, practicing economist for 10 to 15 years, I think, broadly, one has to realize that whatever you say and whatever you think and whatever you do is strictly circumscribed by what the world is open to at that point of time, right? And I think that's something that it's hard for us sometimes to really accept, because there are many people who for years made the argument that we shouldn't really be so concerned about supply constraints, that in fact debt should not be something that we're as concerned about. And these are broadly, I suppose, Josh and my brethren, people broadly in the heterodox sphere. And it was only after 2011, 12, 13, when the world started to move away from, later, maybe 2014, 15, when the world started to move away from austerity, or the costs of austerity became well known, that space was made for these kind of arguments. And it's always the case like that. Spaces are made in some moments and they're not available in other moments. Now, of course, there are those people, for whatever reason, I think it's a more sociological reason. There are people who, for whatever reason, in some universities, in some spaces, seem to capture elite opinion. And they're the ones who you see again and again and again. It doesn't really matter if they're right or wrong, but they're the ones who are opinion makers. But I don't think this is distinct from any other marketing, right? There are always going to be a few people who are really, if you will, opinion and market leaders, if you will. I don't know what the correct term is. Having said that, it would be good if we were able to, sometime or the other, actually have a list of when people were wrong, and actually sometimes one feels like it would be good to take people down a peg or two. But again, I don't think it's an important thing. I don't think that we should necessarily valorize economics and economists one way or the other more than they deserve.